Daniel had always believed that life in the mountains would be quiet, peaceful, and full of simple joys. That was one reason he had never moved away from the small town where he grew up. But as he stood outside his wooden house that evening, holding a toolbox in one hand and rubbing the tiredness from his eyes with the other, he realized peace had become harder to find. For many nights, something inside the house had kept breaking, shaking, or making strange sounds. First it was a loose pipe, then a rattling window, then a floorboard that suddenly gave way. At first, he thought it was just the age of the house. Later, he wondered if something else was going on. But what troubled him most wasn't the repairs, it was Liana, his new bride, who felt more anxious every day. Liana was known in the town not only for her height but for her gentle nature. People playfully teased her for being giant-sized, but she never responded with irritation. She simply smiled, carried it with grace, and continued living quietly. To Daniel, she was not a giant. She was someone who made a room feel warm without trying, someone who gave strength simply by being near. Since their wedding a few months earlier, her soft voice had become his calm place. Yet, lately, that same voice often carried worry. That morning, when another loud noise shook the bedroom wall, Liana had pressed her hands over her ears. She whispered with tired eyes, "I can't take it any longer." The words were soft, not angry, but filled with a kind of fear that made Daniel's chest tighten. He knew she wasn't complaining about him. She was exhausted from nights of sudden noises and broken things. She barely slept, and even simple tasks felt heavier for her. So Daniel had taken her hands gently and tried to give her comfort. "We'll try again tonight," he promised, hoping his voice sounded stronger than he felt. She nodded, silently. She trusted him, but he could see how tired she was. That look stayed in his mind all day and pushed him to prepare more carefully than before. Now the sun was dipping behind the mountains, turning the sky golden, and the cold evening wind brushed against Daniel's face. He tightened his grip on the toolbox and walked back into the house. Inside, the lights were warm, but the air felt tense, as if the house itself knew it had caused trouble. Liana was sitting on the couch, wrapped in a blanket even though she rarely felt cold. When she saw him, she tried to smile, but exhaustion softened the curve of her lips. "Are you sure you want to check everything again tonight?" she asked quietly. He nodded. "Yes. Tonight I'll find the real cause. Something isn't right in these walls. I'll keep trying until I fix it." She slowly stood up, towering gently over him the way she always did. But tonight, she seemed smaller somehow, like worry had taken some of her height away. She placed a large hand on his shoulder. "Just be careful," she murmured. He promised he would, then started with the kitchen. The first noise had started there days ago. He opened the cabinets, tested the pipes, shook the counters slightly, and checked under the sink. Everything looked normal, but the memory of the loud banging 2 nights before didn't match the calm kitchen he was seeing now. He unscrewed a panel behind the sink and shone his flashlight inside. Dust, wood, pipes, nothing unusual. Liana was behind him, watching with concern. Every time he moved a tool or touched a surface, she flinched a little. Not out of fear of him, but out of fear that something would suddenly break again. Daniel noticed it and felt even more determined to find the answer. "Nothing here," he said, closing the panel. "Let's try the hallway next." The hallway had narrow walls and a long wooden floor that creaked with every step. Daniel walked along it slowly, pressing the boards with his foot to test for weakness. A few spots were soft, but not enough to explain the violent shaking they had felt the previous night. Liana followed him silently, her long fingers lightly touching the wall as if she were trying to listen to it with her hands. A sudden thud came from the far corner of the hallway, making her jump. Daniel rushed ahead, tools clattering in his hands, but when he reached the spot, the hallway was still. He looked up at Liana, who had placed a hand on her chest to steady her breathing. "It's okay," he said softly. "I'm here." She nodded, though the fear in her eyes lingered. They moved to the living room next. Daniel inspected every part, the windows, the frame, the corners behind the furniture. Liana helped by moving the heavy chairs with ease, something he usually needed both hands for. They worked like a team, but every now and then, she paused, holding her head as if each unexpected sound added weight to her thoughts. Daniel paused and looked at her carefully. "You're not the problem," he said gently. "Don't think your size is hurting this house. It's something else. Something we haven't seen yet." "I know," she whispered, though her voice showed she didn't fully believe it. "But I feel like everything breaks because I'm here." He stepped closer, took her hand, and gave it a small squeeze. "No, houses break because they're old, not because of people. And besides, you're the strongest person I know, but you've never been rough with anything." Her eyes softened, and for a brief second, the worry faded. The last place to check was their bedroom. It was the room where most of the night problems began. Daniel opened the closet, checked the wooden edges, then crouched to inspect the floor. The wooden planks looked old, but not damaged enough to cause the loud cracking they had heard. Then he saw it something tiny but unusual. A small piece of shredded fabric lay near the corner of the baseboard, as if something had dragged it inside the wall. He picked it up and frowned. It wasn't from their clothes. It was older, dusty, and worn out. "Liana," he said slowly, "look at this." She knelt beside him, her eyes widening slightly. "Where did that come from?" "I don't know, but it didn't come from anything we own." He tapped the baseboard lightly, and it made a hollow sound, not unusual, but something about the echo felt different. He pressed harder. The wood shifted slightly. He ran his fingers along the bottom edge and found a gap. Something had pushed the board outward. He stood up and stepped back. "I think something is inside the walls," he said. Liana's face paled. "Inside the walls?" "Maybe," he answered calmly. "Not something dangerous, I hope. But maybe that's what's been causing the shaking and noises." Her hand trembled as she held her arms close to her body. "Daniel, I don't know if I can take another night like last night." He stepped close, placed a gentle hand on her arm, and looked into her eyes. "You won't face it alone. Tonight, we'll find out the truth. No more guessing. No more fear." She took a slow breath and nodded. "Okay. I trust you." Night slowly settled outside, and the house grew quieter. But inside their hearts, a new tension formed. Half fear, half determination. Daniel gathered more tools, checked his flashlights, and prepared for whatever they might find. Liana stayed near him the whole time, not wanting him to go into any room alone. She felt safer with him close, even if the unknown still haunted her thoughts. When the clock struck midnight, another sound echoed from the walls. Soft, quick, almost like scratching. Liana's breath caught. Daniel stepped toward the noise, steadying himself. The walls were no longer silent. Something was definitely alive inside. He turned toward her and whispered with seriousness and calm determination, "Tonight, we'll find the truth." Her eyes were full of hope and fear together, but she nodded, trusting him fully. And with that, Daniel pressed his hand against the wall, ready to uncover what had been tormenting their nights for so long. Daniel stood still for a moment, listening to the faint scratching inside the wall. Liana stood behind him, holding her breath without realizing it. The house felt too quiet, like it was waiting for something to happen. Daniel slowly moved closer to the wall while keeping his flashlight in his hand. In the dark room, the small beam of light seemed almost too weak, but it gave him enough courage to take the next step. He pressed his ear gently against the wooden surface. The sound came again, quick, soft, and restless, as if tiny feet were moving inside. He stepped back, exhaled slowly, and nodded to Liana. "Something is definitely in there," he said quietly. Liana's shoulders tightened. Even in dim light, Daniel could see how tense she had become. She was already tired from many sleepless nights. Every new noise only added more stress. She tried her best to stay calm, but her breath came in small, shallow waves. "Do you think it's dangerous?" she asked. Daniel shook his head. "We'll find out. But it doesn't sound big. It might just be animals looking for warmth." He tried to keep his voice steady so she would feel safer. She nodded, though her eyes still reflected fear. Daniel stepped toward the toolbox, choosing a flat metal tool to gently pry the loose baseboard where he found the torn fabric earlier. He didn't want to break anything unless he had to. He slipped the tool under the edge and pushed slowly. The board lifted a little, revealing a narrow, dark opening behind it. Liana covered her mouth as a sudden smell of dust, old wood, and something earthy drifted out. Daniel shined his flashlight inside. At first, the inside of the wall looked like any old house interior: dark wooden beams, insulation, and ancient dust. But after a second, something moved. Liana gasped softly and gripped the arm of a chair to steady herself. A small shape scurried deeper into the shadows. Daniel's heart sped up, but he forced himself to stay calm. "It's okay," he said gently. "It's small." He couldn't see exactly what it was, but it wasn't large enough to be a threat. Liana whispered, "Maybe. Animals usually don't live alone." He kept the flashlight steady and leaned a little closer. As his eyes adjusted, he noticed more torn pieces of old cloth tucked between the beams. There were also dried leaves and sticks brought in from outside. It was a nest. A big one. That explained so much: the shaking noises, the thuds, the scratching, the sudden movement inside the walls. A family of animals had been living in their home without anyone knowing. Liana took a step back, hugging herself. "So, all this time, we weren't alone?" Daniel turned toward her immediately. "Nothing dangerous," he assured her again. "Just animals trying to survive. But I'm sure this is what caused all the strange nights." She lowered her head. "I kept thinking I was the reason things were breaking. I thought maybe my weight, or my steps, made the house weaker." Daniel put down the tool and walked to her. He held her hands gently, feeling how cold they were. "No," he said firmly. "You didn't do anything wrong. This old house needed repairs long before we moved in. It wasn't you. This was the real cause." Her eyes softened, but tears gathered at the corners. He gave her hands a reassuring squeeze, then went back to the wall. "Let me see how big the nest is. I need to know what we're dealing with." Liana hesitated before stepping closer again. She didn't want him doing this alone, even if the thought of something crawling inside the wall made her heart race. She placed one hand lightly on his shoulder, grounding herself as he knelt down. Daniel shined the flashlight inside again, and this time saw movement clearly. A small furry creature poked its head out, briefly: round eyes, pointed ears, and a nervous twitch. It disappeared again the second the light hit it. Behind it, he could see more rustling shapes, though none came forward. "Looks like raccoons," he whispered. "Maybe a mother with her young ones." Liana bit her lip. "Raccoons? Inside our walls?" "Yes," he said softly. "They must have gotten in through a broken opening outside. And they've been living here for a while." "Aid." She swallowed nervously. "What do we do now?" "We'll guide them out safely," he replied. "We won't harm them. But they can't stay here." Liana looked relieved that he didn't suggest anything cruel. She cared deeply for animals, even when she was afraid of them. Daniel always admired that part of her. He used another tool to widen the opening slightly. Not enough to damage the wall permanently, but enough to let the animals out if they wanted to move. He backed up and whispered, "We're not going to touch them. We'll wait and see if they come out on their own." She nodded, though she kept her distance. They sat down quietly on the floor, the house dim except for their flashlight. Minutes passed slowly. Every small sound made Liana flinch a little. But Daniel kept holding her hand. The scratching continued, followed by soft chirping noises. It sounded almost like the raccoon family was talking among themselves. Daniel whispered, "They're scared too. They don't understand what's happening." Liana rested her head against his shoulder. "I wish they didn't choose our house," she said honestly. "But I also feel a little sad for them." "That's because you have a kind heart," he replied. She didn't respond, but the warmth of his words eased some of the tightness in her chest. After a while, one of the small raccoons came closer to the opening. It paused, sniffed the air, then crawled out timidly. Liana's eyes widened, but she stayed still. It was small, barely bigger than a kitten. Its movements were cautious and gentle. Another followed, then another. Daniel watched them closely, gently guiding them toward the open back door he had unlocked earlier. The tiny creatures hesitated, but eventually made their way outside, disappearing into the night. Only the mother raccoon remained. She stayed inside the wall, protecting the last little one. Daniel didn't force her. He simply waited patiently, keeping the room quiet so she would feel safe. Finally, she emerged with the last baby gripping her fur. She hurried through the hallway and out the door. Daniel exhaled in relief. The wall went still. The scratching stopped. For the first time in many nights, the house felt calm. Liana stared at the empty opening, her hands slowly lowering from her face. "They're gone," she whispered. "Yes," Daniel said softly. "We did it." She stepped closer to him, her shoulders sagging with deep relief. "You were right. It wasn't me. It wasn't anything I did." He brushed a hand against her cheek. "It was never you, Liana." She smiled faintly, but her eyes still carried worry. "But the house? It still shakes sometimes. We heard other noises too. What if there's more?" Daniel nodded thoughtfully. "That's why we're not done yet. Now we know there's a hidden entry somewhere outside. We need to find it. And we need to check the foundation and the walls. The house is old. It's been needing repairs for a long time." Liana looked around the room with a mixture of fear and hope. "So, this isn't the end. But maybe this is the beginning of the answer." "Exactly," he said. She stepped closer again, her large hand resting against his chest. "Thank you for not giving up. Thank you for listening to me when I said I couldn't take it anymore." Daniel wrapped his arms around her and held her gently. "You don't have to face anything alone. Not while I'm here." The quiet room surrounded them like a soft blanket. For a moment, both felt the peace they had been missing for so long. But outside, the wind picked up. The house creaked gently, the way old homes do at night. Liana stiffened again. Daniel whispered, "Tomorrow, we'll find the opening. And tomorrow night, the house will be quieter." She nodded slowly, trusting him even though her heart still trembled. That night, they slept lightly, unsure if the noises would return. And for the first time in many nights, Liana closed her eyes without fear, knowing Daniel was beside her, ready to face whatever came next. The next morning arrived slowly, with soft light slipping between the curtains and touching the wooden floor. Daniel woke first. His eyes felt heavy, but he knew he could not waste time. The raccoons were gone, but their presence had uncovered a bigger problem, something deeper inside the house. Liana was still asleep beside him, breathing slowly for the first time in days. He did not want to disturb her, so he quietly slipped out of bed, put on his jacket, and stepped outside. The cold morning air met him with a sharp bite. Small patches of frost covered the grass, and the tall mountains around the house cast long shadows across the yard. Daniel walked around the house slowly, running his fingers along the outer walls, looking for cracks or holes. If animals had made their way inside, there had to be a hidden entry somewhere. maybe near the foundation or under the porch. He checked every corner carefully, crouching down despite the cold making his knees ache. After several minutes, he found a broken wooden panel near the back porch, pushed outward as if something had squeezed through. The opening was small enough for raccoons, yet large enough to cause trouble. He sighed. So this is where it all started. The wood was old, soft from years of rain and snow. He poked it gently, and it crumbled slightly. That meant more repairs would be needed. But at least now, he had proof. The house wasn't haunted or cursed or falling apart because of Liana. He headed back inside, where he found Liana walking slowly down the hallway, wrapped in a blanket, her hair messy from sleep. She looked calmer, but still tired. "Morning," Daniel said softly. She stopped and smiled faintly. "Morning. Did you sleep?" She knew the answer, but she still asked. "A little," he said. "But I found something. Outside." She blinked a few times, trying to push away the last bits of sleep. "Something good? Or something bad?" "Something helpful," he replied. "The entry where the raccoons came in." Her eyes widened. "Really?" "Yes. It's near the back porch. The wood is old and broken." They pushed it open. Liana exhaled. The relief in her voice was clear. "So, that explains everything." "Enaraf. It explains a lot," he agreed. "But there's more. The house still shakes sometimes. The floors feel uneven. I think the foundation needs checking too." Her shoulders tensed again. "Foundation? That sounds serious." "It might be," he admitted. "But it doesn't mean the house is falling apart. It just means it needs repair. And we can do that." She lowered her gaze, fingers tightening on the blanket. He stepped closer and touched her arm. "Hey," he said gently. "Remember what I told you yesterday? None of this is your fault." She nodded slowly, though uncertainty still clouded her face. I worry that maybe I put too much pressure on the floors or the beams. I know I'm heavier than most." Daniel shook his head firmly. "This house was built 50 years ago. It was bound to weaken over time. Even if you weighed nothing, old wood would still crack. Weather does more damage than anything else." Liana didn't respond right away, but she seemed slightly comforted. "So what do we do first?" "First," Daniel said, "we close that opening. Then we check the foundation. We'll fix whatever needs fixing." Liana nodded with determination this time. "Then, let's do it." They both stepped outside with tools in hand. Liana helped hold the new wood panel, while Daniel hammered nails carefully, making sure the board fit tightly over the broken gap. She steadied the board with ease, and he marveled, as he always did, at how strong and gentle she was at the same time. When the panel was secure, Daniel walked around the house again, tapping the lower beams and listening. Liana followed closely, watching him work, trying to understand what each sound meant. At one point, he tapped a beam near the side wall and frowned. "This one is weak," he said. "The wood sounds hollow." Liana leaned down beside him. "Is it dangerous?" "Not yet," he replied. "But it will be, if we leave it." She looked worried. "Can we fix it ourselves?" Daniel thought for a moment. "We can try. But we might need stronger support beams. Maybe some metal brackets." Liana nodded, her expression serious. "Tell me what to do." Daniel smiled slightly. He loved that about her. Even when she was scared, she was always willing to help. They spent hours checking each part of the house corners, beams, the porch, even the roof edges. Liana lifted heavy objects easily, while Daniel took care of measurements, careful work, and planning. Around noon, they took a break inside. Liana made tea, though her hands trembled a little as she poured it into cups. Daniel watched her quietly. She seemed more tired emotionally than physically. The past few nights had drained her spirit. And even though the animals were gone, the worry still lingered deep inside her. She handed him a cup and sat across from him. "Daniel," she said quietly, "do you ever get scared? Really scared?" He looked at her calmly. "Of course. Everyone does. But you act so calm," she whispered. "Like nothing can shake you." He leaned forward slightly. "Liana, being calm doesn't mean I'm not scared. It just means I choose to face things slowly, one problem at a time. Fear doesn't disappear, but we can walk through it." She stared at her cup for a long moment. "Last night, when the scratching stopped, I felt like a weight lifted. But part of me still feels like something bad might happen." He reached across the table and took her hand gently. "Nothing bad will happen while I'm here. And even if something does, we'll face it together." Her eyes filled with warmth for the first time that day. "Thank you, Daniel." They finished their tea and returned to work, checking the foundation next. This was the part Daniel had been most concerned about. They crouched beside the house, lifting a loose panel near the base. When they shined the flashlight underneath, dust floated through the beam, and the ground looked uneven. "There," Daniel said, pointing at a cracked support beam. "That's one reason the house shakes." Liana frowned. "Can we fix that?" "We can reinforce it," he said. "But eventually, we'll need a stronger beam." She nodded quietly. "Then, we should do it. I don't want our home to fall apart." He touched her shoulder gently. "It won't. Not if we rebuild it together." They both crawled under the porch, using boards, stones, and temporary supports to stabilize the beam. It wasn't a full fix, but it stopped the shifting and eased the strain on the rest of the house. Liana held beams steady while Daniel hammered, measured, and adjusted. Dust covered their clothes, but neither complained. When they finally crawled out, tired and dusty, Liana stretched her back and let out a long breath. "I didn't think fixing a house would be this much work." Daniel laughed softly. "Old houses always need love." She smiled weakly. "Like people." He nodded. "Exactly." As the sun began to set, they stood back, looking at the house from a distance. It looked the same as always, but they both knew something had changed, not just inside the walls, but inside themselves. They had discovered root problems, faced fears, and worked as a team. Liana leaned her head on Daniel's shoulder. Daniel wrapped an arm around her gently. "Maybe. And if not, we'll handle it." She looked up at him, her eyes soft. He smiled. "You'd do the same for me." They went inside and cleaned up, washing off dust and dirt. When night finally came, the house felt different, lighter, calmer, almost grateful. Daniel and Liana settled into bed. She curled close, feeling safer than she had in days. It was the first evening when the walls did not shake, the floors did not tremble, and no unexpected sounds came from the halls. But even if they did, Daniel knew they had already found the truth and taken the first steps toward repairing everything. And deep inside, Liana felt something she hadn't felt in a long time: hope. The next few days passed slowly, with each sunrise bringing a little more clarity and each sunset bringing a little more confidence. Daniel and Liana continued working on the house together. Even though the raccoons were gone and the biggest noises had stopped, they both knew the repairs were not finished. Old houses did not heal overnight. They needed care, patience, and steady hands. And that was exactly what Daniel gave. On the fourth morning after the raccoons had left, Daniel woke up early again. The house felt lighter, as if it finally trusted them. He stretched, hearing the soft creak of the wooden floor beneath his feet. But this time, the creak sounded normal, not frightening or sudden, just the natural voice of an aging home. Liana was already awake, sitting near the window with a blanket around her shoulders, looking out at the mountains. Her posture was relaxed, her breathing calm, and her eyes softer than the days before. For the first time in a long time, she did not look tense or scared. Daniel walked over quietly and stood beside her. Couldn't sleep? She smiled gently. I slept. Just woke up early. After a pause, she added, I feel different today. Lighter. He rested a hand on her shoulder. That's good. You deserve to feel peaceful. Number 4. One think the niver. One think the days. Way. She turned toward him, her tall frame rising as she stood. I want to help with the final repairs today. Let's finish this house so we can finally live without all that fear. Daniel nodded. We'll finish it together. They stepped outside after breakfast, tools in hand, ready to face whatever was left. The morning sun warmed the yard, melting the frost and bringing a golden shine to the wooden boards of the house. The air smelled of pine trees and fresh soil, one of the reasons Daniel had always loved living in the mountains. Their first task was to reinforce the beams that had weakened over the years. Liana held the heavy support pieces steady, while Daniel measured, adjusted, and hammered the brackets in place. Sometimes she had to lift entire sections of wood so he could slide new supports underneath. Her strength made the work much easier. But Daniel knew it wasn't just physical strength, it was emotional strength too. She kept going, even when the dust scratched her throat or when her hands turned numb from holding cold metal. At one point, she paused and looked down at him. Do you think, after all this, the house will finally feel safe? He wiped sweat from his forehead. Yes. Once these beams are secure, the house will be stronger than it's been in years. She nodded thoughtfully. Good. I want this place to feel like home, not like a place that breaks every time I walk. Daniel set down his hammer and touched her hand gently. Liana, this place already feels like home because you're here. Even when the walls shook, even when things broke, even when nights felt long, you were still the heart of this house. Her eyes softened deeply. I didn't know you felt that way. He smiled softly. They worked in silence after that, but it was a warm silence, filled with unspoken understanding. The sound of tools echoed through the yard, steady, calm, reassuring. Next, they repaired the staircase leading to the porch. The wood had worn thin, and each step wobbled dangerously. Daniel cut new boards while Liana sanded the rough edges until they were smooth. She enjoyed that part. Something about smoothing old wood felt healing to her, like erasing the scars of the past. Once the boards were cut, she held them in place as Daniel nailed them down. The rhythm of the hammer was almost musical. She watched him carefully, admiring his patience. He didn't rush, didn't get frustrated, didn't blame the house for its age or imperfections. He simply worked with quiet determination, the same determination he had shown when helping her through her fears. By noon, the porch looked new, fresh boards, solid steps, strong railings. Liana stood back and admired their work. It looks beautiful, she said proudly. Daniel smiled. It looks safer. That's what matters. She nodded. I can walk on it without worrying anymore. They ate lunch outside under the shade of the porch roof. The wind rustled through the trees, and birds chirped somewhere in the branches. Liana took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of fresh wood and forest air. It feels peaceful today, she said, like the house is finally resting. Daniel gazed at the home they had built together. Homes feel what we give them, and we've given this one patience and care. After lunch, they moved to the final tasks, sealing small cracks, tightening loose brackets, and inspecting the roof edges once more. Daniel climbed the ladder, while Liana held it steady from below. He trusted her completely, and she trusted him in return. At one point, when he climbed down, she said quietly, Daniel, I need to tell you something. He turned to her. What is it? She hesitated, brushing a hand over her hair. The first night we heard those noises, I thought maybe I didn't belong here. I kept thinking, Maybe I was too much for this home. Too tall. Too heavy. Too different. Daniel stepped closer, his eyes gentle. Liana, you belong here more than anything. This house wasn't breaking because of you. It was breaking because it needed us to take care of it. Her voice trembled a little. I'm glad I didn't run away from it. Or from you. He reached up and cupped her cheek softly. I would have followed you anywhere. She closed her eyes, letting his words sink into her heart. For the first time in many nights, her fears loosened their grip completely. They returned to work with renewed energy. By late afternoon, the repairs were finally done. The beams were firm, the floors stable, the porch strong, and every possible entry for animals was sealed tightly. Daniel wiped his hands on his jeans and looked at the house with deep satisfaction. Liana stood beside him, tall and steady. Is it really finished? She asked. Daniel nodded. Yes, we did everything we could. This home is strong again. She let out a slow breath, long and relieved. Daniel, thank you. For not giving up. For trying every night. For making it safe. He smiled. I promised we would try again. I meant it every time. The evening sky slowly turned golden, and shadows stretched across the yard as the sun lowered behind the mountains. They stepped onto the porch and sat side by side, watching the light fade. For a long time, neither of them spoke. They didn't need to. The peace they felt was enough. Liana leaned gently against him, her large frame relaxing fully for the first time since the troubles began. Daniel wrapped an arm around her shoulders and rested his cheek against her hair. This house feels different now. That's because it's ours, Daniel replied softly. Fixed with our hands. Strengthened with our teamwork. She smiled, and her voice held warmth. And built with your patience. With your courage too, he said. The first stars appeared in the sky as the night settled in. The house stood strong, quiet, and grateful. No longer hiding any secrets in its walls or cracks. There was no scratching, no shaking, no fear. Only the gentle creak of wood adjusting to the cool night air. Liana closed her eyes peacefully. Maybe tonight, I'll finally sleep without worry. Daniel kissed her forehead lightly. You will. And if anything happens, I'll be right here. She rested her hand over his. I know. The world around them grew darker, but for the first time in a long while, neither felt afraid. They had faced the unknown, repaired the damage, and rebuilt not only their home, but their trust in themselves and in each other. And as the quiet night wrapped around them, the gentle giant bride, who once whispered she couldn't take it any longer, felt safe again, held by the man who kept his promise. We'll try again tonight. They had tried. They had succeeded. And now, at last, their home and their hearts could finally rest.